Alors first, thanks very much to everybody. Thanks for the organizer of this great sessions on different talk. I hope I could give you some things to think finally about the pandemics and about what I'm doing there in Southeast Asia. So I belong to the CNRS, but I'm attached to CIRAD, an agriculture institution, and based in two universities, the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine here in Kasetsart University, but I also an invited professor at the Faculty of Tropical Medicine. I'm not a vet, I'm not a physician, but it's quite nice here to be, I would say, to make a bridge between the ecological domain and animal health and public health domain. So finally, since many years, we can really develop these studies and these research about the interaction between environment, wildlife, domestic animals, and humans. And actually, you were right, Natalie. Before 2020, when I gave some talks or lecture about disease ecology, I always started with this kind of pictures, discussion about SARS, about the flu and the avian flu, or even the Mexican flu from the swine flu, and about all these continuing emerging disease. And if you remember, it just 1 year ago, and we have really to remember in mid-January 2020, there was some, we were some quite starting to have some warning, but actually not very well recognized everywhere outside Asia, that there was something going wrong in Wuhan city with a new emerging disease, and actually it was already said it was a new coronavirus. And at this time, 17 January, there were colleagues from Imperial College. They estimated only 1,700 cases at Wuhan city, a big hub. And just 1 week after, China locked down several cities with 18 million people to stop the spread of the virus. Everybody thinks, I remember, for in Europe, it's impossible. This is only China can do this. No problem, it's nothing. Some people already said that it's only a small flu, so not be afraid. But now we are still today with at least 100 million people already infected in the world, at least, and more than 2 million people died from this disease that spreads everywhere. Of course, we are developing vaccine. We're starting to do vaccine, but with a lot of different problems because virus evolve, and we have some new variants potentially can reinfect people that were already infected, and which can be also potential treats for the vaccine we produce. And this was already known. So, for example, in this book that we published in 2018 for the emergence of infectious disease, and I will start to look at the data last year because of the epidemics. And we have a great acceleration of epidemics. If we are looking at this slide here, we have an increase of the epidemics, outbreaks of human infectious disease still the 1940s. So we have really increased more and more epidemics, but it's also for the animal infectious disease, even we can go only still 2005 with globally more animal infectious disease showing outbreaks. And this is somewhat somehow related also with the increasing global trades and travels. We have to remember, in 1970, we were only 500 million people to take a plane in the year. In 2019, we were more than 4 billion, 1,300% increase. And for the air freight, it is the same. the amount of goods that were transported by plane only increased, and it's for all of this. But what is important is not only the increase of the number of epidemics, but it's also the globalization of epidemics. Here, what I've done is just to use a network analysis, like a social network, and to see the sharing of disease and using the modularity. And what we can see here is there is really a sharp decline in 1962, around 1960, where there was a decrease of modularity, which means more increase of sharing of epidemics. So now we are more and more epidemics, but more and more epidemics that are spreading all over the countries, all over the world, the planet, which means pandemics. More and more. This was already on the way for several. So this explains why, if there is a disease somewhere, for example, starting to have some connection, some infectious cases locally, and why, if it's going to a hub like Wuhan, is starting to spread all over the world. This is the globalization related to the initial spread, initial cluster of infections. But we have to understand why it's starting, why there is more disease. And I can show you only three important factors. The first one is the great acceleration of farming. This is also amazing, of the increase of the number of domestic animals, especially the livestock, increasing, or the poultry, increasing over the year. I use in this case the data of the FAO, the Food the United Food Administration Organization for Food and Alimentation. And what you see, for example, for the livestock, the cattle, in 1960, there were less than 1 billion. In 2016-17, more than 1.5 billion. For the pigs, 500 million. Now, close to 1.5 billion. The chicken, 4 billion, are now close to 25 billion. Everything like this, just on increase. If we're looking at the biomass of cattle on Earth is higher than the biomass of humans. Pigs are not so far. This is only for the wild vertebrates. Actually, 90% of the biomass of mammals I would say, mammals on terrestrial birds are humans on poultry, on livestock on Earth. It's only a small part for the remaining wildlife. And what is also changing a lot is also the globalization and the circulation, the trade flows all over the livestock. In the 1960s, the animals, the farm animals, stay in the farm and they can roam freely in the backyards or in the grassland. Now they are in the big buildings, in the big factory, and in the CAFO, what we say, but we transport them all over the world, which may also favor the spread, of course, of the disease, but also the impact of these increasing on trade on the remaining environments. So when we look at the rising of the livestock, here we found a good correlation with the increase of epidemics around the 60s, or the 60s to the 70s. Increasing number of cattle are related to increases outbreaks of epidemics in humans, of course controlling for all kinds of confounding factors, but also the number of cattle explain the decrease of biodiversity with increasing number of species put at risk. This, we can see also the great acceleration of changing ecosystems. I would show only some new data that we are only submitted to be reviewed. What we were looking is the change in the forest cover all over the world, mostly the big forested area, the tropical forested area are losing a lot of traditional forests, about the more pristine forest. While we have also reforestation, but we will see what kind of reforestation in the country like Northern Hemisphere, but we can see also China or India. But we can see the change. Reforestation is mostly plantation. It's not multifunctional forest. It's really commercial forest. But we have also commercial crops like the oil palm areas that also increasing mostly in the tropical countries. And when we look at the relationship between change in forest cover or change in oil palm areas cover, we can see that there is a good correlation with the increases of zoonotic disease and vector-borne disease, meaning that deforestation or plantations favor the epidemics of zoonotic and vector-borne disease, and we have many examples. Like vector-borne disease is Zika, dengue, chikungunya, but with the zoonotic disease, we have many things notably related with rodents. On this, the deforestation is really because we need to transfer to finally to convert forests to the production, especially the production of plant proteins to feed the animal farming, to feed the animals. So mostly this is this impact. Or we are doing new crops for the global trade also. All of this is a great acceleration of biodiversity loss. We are entering into the sixth extinction. This was repeated all the time by the IPBES, by the IUCN. I will just show you the last Living Planet Index report by the WWF, and the last one from the last year, 2020, where they follow on this. This is open data. It's long-term studies about population dynamics and wildlife population dynamics all over the world. And you can follow the trends as a baseline, 100, putting the baseline, and you're looking what's everywhere, except a little bit in northern Eurasia. Every year we have a really declining population trends. For a lot of these species. We have also an increasing number, as I told before, of the number of species put on the red list, and we have also increasing number of species that are declared to be extinct in the wild. And why is it important? So just for these new books that will appear in 1 month in French, actually at the moment. What we were looking and what I looked at using new data, the relationship between biodiversity and infectious disease, or biodiversity at threats and epidemics. So biodiversity here you see, the more is dark, the more is higher biodiversity, and especially here for mammals. So mostly high biodiversity around the tropics. And there is quite an interesting first correlation. This is the number of species, wild species, birds and mammals, and even invertebrates. And this is the number of infectious diseases that have been reported in each country, which means that is the historical burden of disease. It doesn't mean that they make outbreaks, but it means they have been reported. On this, you found that there is a good correlation. And it's normal. Biodiversity is also the biodiversity of viruses, bacteria, protists, worms, all of these that can cause infectious or parasitic disease in humans. Which said that, okay, just kill them all and we will reduce the burdens. And actually, it is what is going on. We are more and more biodiversity at threat. This is what the number of mammal species that were at threat in 2008 by Schipper. I will show you more recent data. We see that there was only one hotspot of biodiversity at threat in the world. Southeast Asia. It's explained why in 2008 I started really to work in this place. And if I use the number of these species at threat, of course corrected for the number of species known in this country, and I look at if there is a correlation with the number of outbreaks I showed you before, of course corrected for the number of infectious diseases that have been reported in the country. And we found a good correlation, meaning that the rise of epidemics is also related to the rise of biodiversity at threat. How to explain this? It's quite easy to explain this. It is because losing biodiversity is not only losing species, it's losing all the connection, all the interaction among species. If you lose species, first you lose the big predators that regulate the prey. Most of these prey are potentially reservoirs. You lose also the birds that can control the vectors, like the mosquitoes. But you lose also some species. So you lose also all the competition between species. You simplify the landscape, which means that the species that really continue to live and that increasing in number is mostly the synanthropic species, like the rats, for example, but not only. So finally, you favor spillover of wildlife, including the synanthropic species, to the increasing number of humans a little bit, but especially the farming animals, the domestic animals. So you favor all this connection to the human. And you lose the regulation. You lose the important aspect, which is an ecosystem services of the regulation of disease transmission. That explains why we have, over the last 20 years, a lot of disease that were not very common for humans, but are start to emerge, either like for the beta coronavirus, either from bats, but also from rodents to the humans, and sometimes through the domestic animals. Remember the MERS coronavirus that emerged in 2014, in the Middle East. It was from bats to the camels, and after to the human, and spread in quite a lot of countries. That's why it explains me why I moved this, and this is a more recent papers in 2019. Southeast Asia is still the big hotspot of threatened terrestrial vertebrates, not only losing a lot of other parasites and other wildlife and plants and even the cultural diversity. So it means that during 12 years, actually, starting to work in Southeast Asia with several projects and trying to link biodiversity conservation, so really with the people interested in, like my domain in biodiversity, and the people mostly working in the public health sectors or the animal health sector with the infectious disease in Southeast Asia. I try to merge there. And I just want to say that is also a region that very rich in the diversity of languages. It's amazing of the number of languages, but at threats. Around half of the languages will disappear in the next 30 to 40 years in Southeast Asia. This is the place we are losing everything. So what we did during 12 years or more, thanks to this project and some other supported by the French ANR, but by some other project. First, mostly interesting in rodents and rodent-borne disease, and we were looking at everything in changing environment. So I did a lot of field trips, and 34 field trips at least, in Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, a little bit in Vietnam and in Philippines. I spent actually in 10 years, 1 year and a half in the field, collecting rodents, and after we have a lot of collaboration for investigating all these pathogens. More recently, working more in the epidemiology and also in the local communities, but I will show you a little bit before. What we found really what we are interested in, why we have more risk of emerging disease. It's not only because we're losing species, but also because there is a changing landscape. The increase of urbanization, but the intensification of agriculture means that it favors mostly synanthropic rodents, the rodents, because we were using rodents, the rodents that like humans, that like human landscape, but are also the good host for many infectious diseases, and this was completely linked with this increasing of prevalence of this pathogen within the rodent. We can link also with the human case more recently. This is the case, for example, also the previous was in the mainland Southeast Asia. There was this case in Borneo with some colleagues from Australia and from Malaysia, where we were looking along a gradient of urbanization, rodents and rodent-borne disease. So here I will show you only the leptospirosis, and that gives the Leptospira species, but that gives the leptospirosis. And we see the gradient of increasing prevalence when we are going from rural to developing and to urban. So it means that increasing urbanization, especially when we are at the beginning of the urbanization, but increasing farming, increasing intensification of agriculture favor really the risk and the transmission to humans. Alors, to go a little bit there, to investigate more this, we did for also 10 years this year, develop a more intensive study in northern Thailand, what we name a social ecological and health observatory. Why? Because in the process, we were more, what I show you, it was more what we did for the moment, more retrospective. We use the data from the past, land use, land cover, policy, health information, and we try to understand why we are there. Now, we try to see that can we have a little better process-based predictive scenarios. Even, for example, we can show that we could not predict why we have the next pandemics, but mostly to see that working also with local people, we can have several kinds of scenarios of the best, scenario of the worst, mostly using policy-driven influences and working in some epidemiological-based model from several. But we need, of course, to have a lot of information locally and work with people, nationally with the public health and the animal health, with some other ministry in Thailand, but also locally with local administration. And thanks because we used to work now for 10 years in a sub-district in Nan province, very close to Laos border. And you see this district is from the national park here. There is a national park, and up to the floodplain on the city of along the Nan River, the city of Tawangpa. So 8 villages, 4 that were in the upland and 4 that were mostly in the mainland. And we work with the administration. So there we did a lot of work starting with rodent on rodent-borne disease, but after starting to work on blood, on fecal, the blood parasite or the gut parasite for the human, but also for the livestock. Working also on dogs, working also on the pesticide, working also on the antimicrobial resistance, working on biodiversity. So this is all the project now that we are conducting. On some other are working. I can say rodent-borne zoonotic disease, tick-borne disease, mosquito-borne disease, food-borne disease, antimicrobial, exposome. Also the traditional knowledge, pharmacopoeia on traditional ecological knowledge, microbiota, rickettsial disease, dogs, so quite a lot. All the time, I will show you some example. Try to have a lot of information on biodiversity, but also information, technical design, and ethical design. And all the time is like this. When you work like this, and it's important after if you want finally to co-develop all together some solution regarding the health, you need to know very well your stakeholder network. So we are important in terms of the provincial and nationally. So we work here at the really sub-district level, but they are related to the provincial and to the national level. We work with what we name a sub-district administration organization. So we work closely with them. So we got a lot of information on everything we want to co-design with the communities. We co-design also with the administration, with the hospital and the primary care unit and the dispensaries. And what is interesting is also to understand how it works in Thailand. You have head of villages, or you have even in the cities and with the different districts in the cities, but you have volunteers. At the level of Thailand, there is 1.3 million of health volunteers that make the connection between the primary care unit, the hospital, the department of health, and the health villages. So it means that they inform about and they are trained by the public health, but also they inform the public health about what's going on in their village, which was very important and explain why Thailand could manage so well by the COVID. So we can learn that some countries are better well prepared for epidemics, including the COVID-19, than the well-developed France or some other countries like the US or the UK. Of course, we collected a lot of information on biodiversity. I'll show you only rodents, fish, but we have also frogs, we have tiger mites. We work with some colleagues of IRD that develop the land use and the land cover and all the way that there is the organization of the crops and the diversity. I develop also the soundscape ecology, so to have also the diversity of the sound and the diversity and also the noise that could affect the health of the local people and the wildlife, which is also one aspect. And I will show you only one example. When we're starting to do the foodborne disease, we work immediately, as I told you, with stakeholders that including Maidol University, a faculty of tropical medicine. People are giving their thesis, so you have to have a stakeholder. The province, of course, it's informed, and the public health. You involve the primary care units that will be around there, officer on assembly, all the head of villages, and all the volunteers. This is the stakeholders. You develop the technical design, what you will do, how you will get the samples, what you will do exactly what you do from the people interview collection to the lab and in the field, but also after the field. And of course, you have to have ethical design, ethic permits on what we name the consent. You have to have informed consent that everybody will see. And after, you can have a questionnaire and you put this. But after you go back, of course, with the local people on the primary care unit. On example, the primary care unit, after regarding the importance in some villages about the foodborne disease, the nurse organized some food contest to improve health education, and with the volunteers, that are some volunteers here on the health care units, they can also make information through the villages, but also to the public health. This was supported, this food contest, by the administration. So all the time is like this. We did another thing, for example, for the participatory mapping or farmer or use of antibiotics like this. All the time is something like this. You have to think that you will have a technical design with the participatory, whatever. You will have to have ethical design, consent, or community engagement. You have to know your stakeholder network. What will be the stakeholder network that will be involved? And after, how to have all the data. You have to have clean data, safe data, to finally have a representation of the data. Questionnaire. For example, we have also all the household mapping. So with the GPS point, thanks to the Oboto, participatory mapping. For example, here we have people, they put their land on what they are doing, some crops, and what they are using of pesticide in their crops, and for what crops. And for example, here we have all the genetics and phenotyping for all the bacteria that are supporting, that have several kinds of antibiotic gene resistance. On all of this, and of course, we have to discuss this. So this is a way. Without this, you cannot plan, you cannot co-construct, you cannot co-build, you cannot share finally your values as a scientist with the values of the different stakeholders, which either the farmers, the head of the village, the public health officers, whatever the organization. You have to find a way. You have to find that the way to finally help people to imagine the different futures according to their values, on their knowledge, and how to, after, to formulate the problem, that you can finally develop and design a protocol to implement this design, to have, after, to go back all the time with to get the stakeholder on the engagement. Everybody is agreed to go to this. And of course the cost, because you have people that will give their time, so you have to think that you have to give some payment, you have to benefit. So you have to also develop, after, the ethics engagement. You have to know and you have to develop what will be the gain, but what could be maybe also the harm to the individuals or to the communities. Maybe what you are doing will harm. You have to develop, you have to state that into your ethic engagement. You have to think about what you are doing as a scientist. You realize, you analyze the results, and the most interesting part after is how to communicate all together in a multiple values, and to give finally to the stakeholders, and these are the stakeholders to make their recommendation. But all of this, you have to have trust documentation, good data, open data, clean data, pictures, maps, sounds, protocol, ethics, scientific articles, reports, and all of this you can all have also all the dissemination on advocacy, how you advocate of the study. All of this is to say that the future is now. And there is the One Health approach. I'm involved in the One Health, even if I'm very critical about the One Health. The One Health is good the way that they want to make the connection between humans, animals, and the environment to prevent disease threats, but most of the time is really, really on the surveillance, biosurveillance, and biosecurity. So it's, for me, act too much that you cannot act on the, how to explain the disease. You cannot act on the beginning of the disease, on what is going to the change, you cannot do nothing on the change. You will only try to manage the consequence of the changes. And these are really not lacked very much. We try with my colleague to see that no, we have to do better. We need to have a better and greater integration of the environmental domains in the One Health. This is really important. Maybe now it's changing because the UNEP and the United Nations Programme of Environment join for sure the One Health, so we will see. Another way which is quite important is the planetary health. Planetary health doesn't look really much at the local, but look at the global. Based on the statement of the Stockholm Resilience Alliance, they say that you have some boundary, planetary boundary, and you should not pass the threshold, some threshold, because we will go out of the self-operating space. And this is quite interesting because you can really put the planetary health into the national policy target, but globally. And the concept of the planetary health is really based on you need to understand and to promote how human health and actually human civilization are really depending on flourishing natural system, and that we need to better steward and to be a better steward of this system. This is quite interesting. So that's why we can really, and now to the ecosystem health and nature-based solutions. These are starting to be work mostly to wetland, mostly also to cities. But I will show you one study that we can do that for disease. This study was published 2 or 3 years ago. It was based on data from Cambodia, or they use a global survey on in the change of the health and the increase of illness in a local population, local community all over Cambodia. And in relative to the change or no change, so people working in dense forest or close to national park or in protected area coverage, in wildlife sanctuary, and you see that the change is really good to live close to nature. It's really good close to nature, not only because you feel good, but actually you are in a better health, even in the low developing countries, especially when you're working in a protected area coverage, so or mixed forest, when you are finally also working in these places. And the worst is where you are a big forest loss, and especially the dense forest loss, which are affecting a lot the health community and also the health, the well-being community. I told you also this was really well implemented now, starting to be implemented in towns and big cities. For example, to stay in Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, or now, Singapore, and a little bit Hong Kong now, with a really design planning with stakeholders, with our urban green space, but also using nature and biodiversity and for health also, not only for climate, but also for health, like for example, the design of for therapeutic gardens in Singapore. And actually, Singapore is a green city with a lot of trees, which also a place which will be very good for Zika, chikungunya, and dengue. And actually, the level of epidemic is very well under control in Singapore. So we can work now. I think is really the beginning to think that we can work to find and to see what are healthy landscapes that works for biodiversity, but that work also for healthy people and communities. This is something new, and I hope with the COVID-19, actually now people will learn and will listen about this. it will really fit with the Sustainable Development Goal. It will fit with the post-IKI target. We should work on this. My conclusion is that now we have to really reconnect, as we already did that in 2 books, mankind to the biosphere at local and global level. So to have real co-viability, a social ecosystem, a social system is viable only if the ecological system supporting the social is viable. We need co-viability. We need really a better supporting communities and people by healthy environment. So we have a lot of concept and framework based on actually on ecosystem services. And we can go to the planetary health at the global. We can go at the One Health. For me, it's mostly at the local. We can promote both. It's not a problem. But what we have to promote that we need to work on healthy ecosystem, on health ecosystem, on environment, because this is the ground where we can build, when we can have healthy people and community, on healthy animals and plants. And we have healthy animals and plants, we have also healthy people, but healthy people will take care also of their animals and their plants. So we should stop the biosurveillance and the biosecurity, but go to the good practices on the care and stewardship. But for this, I think we should, yes, promote interdisciplinarity for research, but we should really promote intersectoriality between the public health, the animal health, the environment, the development, the economic. We need to develop nature solutions for healthy communities, but we need to have community and stakeholder engagement in order to develop best practices for One Health and ecosystem health. And I'm thanking you, and I'm very happy to share some questions with you.
Merci Serge, thank you. So I think I leave the floor to questions from the group or from the people remote. So who is that? Sébastien.
Sébastien Sargent, AgroParisTech. So I have 2 questions. My first question is that when you show the One Health concept with the 3 pillars, human, animals, and environment, I was wondering why there is a 4th pillar that could be plants. It's often put it behind environment, so I don't know if you have feedback, idea on that.
The 4 pillars, what will be the fourth one?
The 4th one could be plant.
Okay, yeah. It's a good point. Actually, people start to think that there is a One Health for plant, one plant health, yeah. And this is a good point, because we need really to involve more the agriculture sector and the agronomy. I remember actually in 2008 also, I was leading a project for CIRAD on emerging disease, and it was very hard to involve the agronomy. People from the agronomy were not very aware at this time of the problems of epidemics and disease in plants. Now it's completely changed. They know that is also because we also face a lot of epidemics in plants, a lot of problems in plants. So now I agree completely with you, which would be also a better way, because for the moment, the FAO, the Food Organization, it's only by the branch of the livestock they are involved in the One Health. With this, we can really increase a lot more of other departments from the FAO. We can involve, of course, the agronomy, but we can involve the nutrition. We can involve also the forestry. So we can involve also better even the fisheries. So we have really to think about this. It's a very good question.
I have 2 questions, but maybe there is other question. You mentioned that there is a decrease in biodiversity. Is there any studies that show also a decrease in pathogen virus and the biodiversity of pathogen and virus?
Yes, yes. For the moment, it's also a good question because actually we know that according to some museum data, we know that some species of ectoparasite actually of birds vanish with these birds. So the extinction of the parasite are linked also with the extinction of some species. But this work only for parasite microbes that are specialists, that are really host specific. They can move, they have what they are, because when we start to understand what is the specificity of parasite or microbes, they are not, the specificity is not only especially for the host, it's a specificity for physiology, for the gut, for the immune system, for the virus is mostly for the cells and the way to invade the cell, whatever the host. So specificity is important. When we look at the specificity, we see that a lot of viruses, microbes, and parasites can infect different hosts. They are not very specific, so they can switch. They can switch.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any question from Betty?
It's about the biodiversity loss, and you just talked also about the immune system. Do you think that there is a link with this biodiversity loss and the fact that maybe we could have a weaker immune system that we would have had 100 years ago, and then these epidemics have stronger effects now than they would have before?
Okay. So the it is a very interesting. Actually, I got several questions, including by journalists. So the immunity is a two parts, actually even a three part. We have a behavioral immunity. For example, social distancing is a behavioral immunity. So this we can learn, we can copy, or we can lose this kind of behavioral immunity. After we have immunity that is really genetics based on genes. So like for example, the MHC, so for us is the HLA, that can confer the genes that helps to recognize the non-self. This we can lose, but to lose this, we should lose the pressure of parasite, and it takes time, or we can have a bottleneck in the population. We can see this, for example, in species endangered when they lost too much genes in immunity. But the last thing, we have the memory immunity, memory and training of immunity. Our immune system is quite naive and trained when you are young and during your first years and from the past on the environment. And also depending on the diversity of your own microbiome. You are trained. Living in a high biodiversity places, you are confronted with a lot of potential antigens. This train your immunity. You are better to finally to recognize the non-self, which means it protects you also against the autoimmune disease. The autoimmune disease starting to emerge in a place where there are a loss of biodiversity. But also you are trained because you are all the time confronted with potential pathogens, more or less fatals. We have tested with some colleagues, from French colleagues, to explain the fatality rate among countries all over the world for the COVID-19. And we were quite amazed. We found altogether what we are already know now, that people that are older, males with chronic disease, especially pulmonary disease, but also diabetes, the fatality rate is higher. But we found that the countries with high level of circulation of respiratory infectious disease, like coronaviruses, show a lower level of fatality rate, which means that here in Southeast Asia, we have a very low fatality rate. Actually, now in Thailand, since the beginning, there is only 80 people in 1 year officially for the COVID-19. Really nothing compared to Delhi. But this because there is maybe we got the protection here, including me, because I'm going a lot in the field work, because we were exposed to other coronaviruses, local from humans, but maybe from pigs, from other animals, which help us to, to mount immune system, and we have cross protection. So yes, in this case, you're absolutely right. Biodiversity actually means you can protect you, even the biodiversity of the microbes.
So, Clément, I think you can take open your micro and ask your question.
Oh, sorry.
It's just that I'm a little bit shy.
No problem. I am shy also.
Yeah, so I wanted to know when you were talking about biodiversity, if that was including all sorts of animals or mainly big mammals and vertebrates. And if we had to make strong actions to protect biodiversity, would there be priorities, like species that we would prefer to save first?
Yeah, good question for conservation again, and difficult question. There are there are several big ways or views about biodiversity. Some say that there is so urgency, so we need to separate human from biodiversity. So we need to have big protected areas and removing as much as possible of population impact in this, except the indigenous people, the local people that already live this, but really to protect this. We spare. And on the other side, we said, okay, whatever, included. So this is the way. I'm saying that in this case, we save as much as possible at the moment to avoid the impact, no more impact. And some other say that we can share actually. We have to find, but we need to have examples. I'm supporting a little bit the sharing, maybe because I work more on humans population, on humans starting to be even if I like rodents, are starting to like humans. They are quite interesting animals and behavior, everything. So I like starting to like humans, and we can co-develop. And that's why also I did this kind of soundscape, sounds recording, and found that the diversity of sound, not noise, are good, and actually biodiversity are good. The ecological resilience of the system are quite nice in the place where there is some, of course, people, but that manage traditionally the landscape, multifunctional landscape, multi-use of the landscape, and traditional also breeds, local breeds of plants, of animals. This is my feeling for the moment. I have absolutely no good science evidence on this, and this is the project I would like to do now for the rest of my careers, and I really invite a lot of you on doing this. So, what is the cold zones of epidemics? What can we find the resilient landscape that are ecologically resilient, socially resilient, and finally that also resilience against the disease that could affect the humans, the plants, or the animals. And I'm pretty sure that this landscape maintain also a good biodiversity there.
Serge, as a climatologist, I have a question for you. Even if the pandemic, of course, has nothing to do with climate, we see that with climate change, the bioclimatic zones are shifting. And
Yeah.
so we are having some disconnected paths that interact now. And I think that the dengue, for example, and some other diseases are moving northwards because of the climate, essentially. So do you think that it's going to increase and then decrease, or it will not do anything, or it's going to dilute it? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, climate change is a really a big topic in the global changes, and we already know that it will not affect equally at the same speed all over the world. For the moment, it's affecting at a very increasing impact the northern hemisphere and especially the really northern, for example, all the Palearctic will be very affected. So more prone to vector-borne disease, more prone potentially for zoonotic disease. We have a lot of examples. And we need to know that also the biodiversity will react, will move also. So we create a new environmental niche for everything, new environmental condition, new environmental connection between microbes, humans, and animals. And we need also, we know that for the perspective of connection, that we need to build more ecological corridors to allow plants and animals, the wildlife, to move in terms of the climate change. So for the moment, the health, all the health, conservative medicine or public health, we are not very concerned about this. So either in the conservation or either the public health. Now they're starting. So we need also again to do more research. But we need to do research that are really applied research. We need to work with the protected areas. We need to work with the conservation and the public health.
Yeah, there is a question on the chat from Asma. Asma, do you want to open your micro and ask yourself your question? Can you read it on the chat? Serge, do you have access to the chat?
Yes, I have to see the chat. I see some. Yes, I have to go there, I think.
There's a question on the social sector.
From Asma, yeah? Completely agree. We need to have more people from the agriculture field, from the agronomy. It's really really important, and I'm more and more even convinced for me and myself, because at the very beginning, even for biodiversity, I was not interested really by the human activity, the agriculture. For me, agriculture was more impacting than doing good things. Now I'm changing really fastly my point of view. We need the people from the agronomy, but also we need the people from the soil, because we need to have healthy soil, and this is also new. So to have healthy soil, it means that we have a good agricultural practices, but also forestry practices. So yes, definitely we need that some crops. We know that also the way that we manage crops and different crops are really important and maybe affected for water resource, for climate change, and even for disease. There is something to work on this, and because which is also the challenge, how to feed the people equally and in good good food. So we are increasing of the number of people that are with bad food quality, either because not enough or either with the junk food, I would say. So we have the rise of obesity and diabetes in many countries, and we need to work really on this. So the food system, on the agriculture system.
Yeah, there is another question here from the room, from Pedro.
Yeah, especially with this last sprint and exam, I mean, could we trace a line between biodiversity, alimentation, and then
I'm sorry, I didn't catch very much your question. I think you were far from the microphone.
It's coming now.
can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, better.
Okay, yeah, just a follow-up question to your last sentence is that can we trace a line between biodiversity, alimentation, and
Biodiversity and nutrition, yeah. Alors, there is and food system and biodiversity. This is something that last year and or 2 years in 2019 was really tackled by the Food and Alimentation Organization. They did very nice. You can go on to this. There is a really nice report on agriculture and biodiversity, which explore first how biodiversity can contribute to a better agriculture, better food system, better, but also for equality, but also how also some kinds of, I would say, worst practices in agriculture can impact biodiversity. So quite nice. They show also, there is another report for the FAO showing also the loss of the livestock breeds, the genetic resources for plants, for livestock, for poultry. 30% of species are under risk also for of breeds are under risk, showing that also that we have to maintain, because it's not only genetic pool that we can take, but it's also very well adapted, and they can also adapt it locally, but they also can adapt, continue to adapt due to the local practices, to the changing environment. This is the two things. And the one thing that very recently that I've been also working on is the soil biodiversity, linking also the above ground biodiversity, soil quality of soil against erosion, on good habitat, good landscape, good ecological functioning. So I think now we have a lot of bases, concept, and to work on and to develop this. The only thing that will make to link this is really the food system. The food system is terrible. It doesn't work. We are going also from crisis to crisis. We know this. Now we know that some countries are starting to stock, like for example the rice. If there is a little problem in the climate, in the production of rice, we will go again to a food crisis. So we have to think the food system, and the food system is in the power, in the hand, mostly of the big agro-industry and the big trading company. And so this is something that is really important to understand. If we don't work on the global trade, we should not succeed in a way to develop an agronomy that will contribute to the health equity, to the food equity, and to save the planet.
Sébastien?
I have another question. You show a slide with greening the city that could increase the biodiversity. How we deal with, let's say, augmented biodiversity, for example, mosquitoes that could come in the city or things like that?
Yeah. This is very interesting, and for me it was quite interesting to see this, because for example you have Bangkok which are not very green. And the level, if you remember, but you will see because you can have the PowerPoint. The coverage by the forest park, by the park is very low, but we have a high case of Bangkok, for example. The regional counselor for health at the French embassy, she got dengue and the family got dengue close to the French embassy, in the middle of Bangkok. So you can get dengue really there. And when we look at the number of cases, the incidence of dengue is quite high in this kind of cities, Bangkok or Manila, or all the cities with low forest cover, low nature cover, which is not the case of Hong Kong or Singapore. Hong Kong and Singapore have a higher forest cover, and with the park and with the garden, with the zoo, on really parks, not in city parks, and the incidence is lower. Why? For two reasons. First, these mosquitoes that spread this new disease, they are a tiger, the Aedes, the two species of Aedes, but mostly the tiger mosquitoes. They really like some kinds of urban environment, and they really like some small, like the pots, like finally not the trees, they need to have like couple, like jars like this to breed and to leave their larvae. So this is one thing which are more important in urbans are not very clean urban than in clean urbans with nature. The second also is the health system. Singapore or Hong Kong have a health system and surveillance that are very well organized, which means that when you can start to have a cluster of dengue, immediately they have a way to control the mosquito population or the mosquito breeding site, which is more important, directly in situ and very fast. So you need to have two. I would have to say that nature solutions mean, resilience, you mean to have also public health resilience in the public health. Example, in Europe, we show that our public health system were not resilient with the pandemics.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Remote or from the room? If we think about greening the city, and yesterday the group on forest showed some patches in saying that they wanted to understand whether biodiversity would spread differently if you are connected, like kind of primary forest with planted forest, but like monoculture and other things. So is there a way to think about, greening a city or greening an area? I guess will not have the same results on the spread of the viruses, depending on how you do this. You say to go back to more resilient practices. So if you plant palm oil, for example, as a monoculture, I guess it's not going to help. Even if it's greener, it's not going to help.
The example of Singapore was, the example of the city and the city-state of Singapore was interesting. Actually, Singapore at the independence was mostly deforested. They have plantation, and but they have the garden, which were built by the colonial. The colonial period by the English. There was a big garden. That was also a place to acclimate species, and especially, for example, the rubber was acclimated. In Singapore, there was a nursery to go after to the plantation. This was Singapore. Singapore was a conservatory for the natural species, especially plants, but was also an acclimatation place for another plant to be bred and to be commercialized. And at the independence, on after the government of Singapore starting to think to continue to promote that, but finally to think that maybe they have also to recreate the old Singapore in terms of forest, and they were naturally forest, multi-forest, but also with the reintroduction of some native tree in Singapore. So they built forest, rebuilt forest. The park actually is really primary forest, and including the zoo, they rebuilt ponds at the same time, and they develop a policy based on the knowledge that biodiversity is important for psychology, for environmental psychology. So they, for example, all hospital, all windows for all patients have a view on the green as a way for the therapeutic. They develop the therapeutic gardens. They develop now, they have the new policy that have been already implemented. Each people in Singapore should be at work at less than 200 meters from a park, from a green area. This is some kind of thing that they were doing. But because I work with them also with the people involved in the public health and in the thing, they have also developed a lot of surveillance, but also to recognize the potential problem, potential risk for infectious disease from the wildlife to the humans. Alors, how they do this? They do this by one way, it's a conflict, the human and wildlife conflict. You have wildlife that come back or that were reintroduced in the cities, and they're starting to enter potentially in your home. Like, for example, the snakes or like some other animals, they could, like the civet, like this, they can enter. So you know that if you have some kinds of intruder, non-expected guest in your house, on your property, you call a special like rangers for the public park in and they are going, they're taking care of these animals, they check these animals in terms they screen these animals that were, and after they release back there. So they have also some kind of passive surveillance screening of the wildlife, but mostly related to the conflict. What is important when you can have a problem is because you have increasing, for example, in the species starting to go close to you. It's the contact that is important. So they use the animal, the wildlife-human conflict as a way to assess the potential risk of disease transmission.
So if there is no question, maybe I have a final question for you, and it relates to how politicians listen to science. So as a
Sorry?
I've got a question relating to how politicians and decision makers listen to science. You have raised awareness decades ago about pandemics, and today everywhere in the world, we don't really know how to manage this COVID. And as climatologists, we have raised awareness 30 years ago, and we know that the costs and the migrations are going to get worse and worse with time. So how to make the scientific word better understood, better listened? If you have on that, and that would be the final word, I guess.
Okay, so for this I'm really pessimistic, but still fighting, because there are several problems. First, when there is a crisis, whatever, economic crisis or sanitary crisis, the politician or the people in charge start to panic and start to say, okay, we will learn, we listen, and we will change. There will be a new world. So you remember when there was the economic crisis. And after, actually they go back with their same values as before. Alors, the reason for this, for me, the one reason, because they are not ignorant, but they don't want to really to change their paradigm. And one is because they work in silos. As I said, you have administration together with administration, and they don't want to do this. In 2019, end of 2019, we were in France, we were at the end of what we named the Plan National Santé Environnement, the PNSE 4, so the National Plan for Environment and Health. It was the end of, and we're starting to have a new one. The one that was finishing, the number 3, there was a special technical group that was biodiversity and health. And this technical group was cancelled. Cancelled by who? By the Ministry of Public Health. That was not interesting, not by the Ministry of Environment, Ecology and Transition. In the end of 2019, 1 month before the emergence of COVID-19. And after we start, and they want starting to do maybe a new technical group, which will be One Health, which means they understand nothing, and they repeat the same thing. Another example is what we can see now with the avian flu in the southwest of France, Landes, with the ducks. Same way as 2016, 2017, started to have introduction of the virus, not only by the wildlife, but because of the transit of the animals. We move animals, infected animals, starting to have this. 2016, 2017, 2 million of ducks were killed. And they say, yes, we have learned, we will do more, we will do so. 2021, similar, and similar, the only response is the culling. And they say, no, but we will now better improve surveillance of wildlife, surveillance on biosurveillance and biosecurity. The same for humans. They are also preparing the same. We have quarantine, we have lockdown, we have impossible to move. Like for the animals, we accept the culling, but when we see what happened in the EHPAD, we can think, and we will have biosurveillance and biosecurity. So it means that this is the way that the politician at the moment work, and at the high level, because they are working really in silos, and the one that are important is only the economics. The economics are the most important one. So if we don't change this, we will not change. We need to force this one at stop to work in silos, but really to work in intersectoriality. We need to force the Ministry of Economy to listen to the Ministry of Public Health and to the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Environment. The Minister of Environment to listen to the Minister of Public. We need this. We need this.
So interdisciplinarity and intersectoriality, which is a new word I'm
Exactly. No, but without I think the interdisciplinarity, we know how to do this. It takes time, but we know how to do this. It takes time to do this. Intersectoriality, we have to create the condition for this. And the only way is to work also locally, to force, to say that, and it can create also local democracy. This is the only way to do this, with the local elected people, local assembly, mayors, with the local economics activities, with the citizen, with the local NGO for environment, for whatever, with the farmers, with also the consumers. We need to work on to show, and after once you can say, okay, we don't care of what are thinking the, the nationality. We have to do whatever for our territories.
Okay.
Like I see in Thailand, finally. I learned a lot what they are doing.
Well, thank you very much, Serge.
Thank you. Thank you.